How's it going? It is Ryan with Reformation Designs, and today I am going live with my friend Rodney Vance. He is a screenwriter and filmmaker and producer, and we're going to be talking all about making your own films, what goes into that, and tips for aspiring filmmakers. This is the Creative Revolution Podcast, Season 2, Episode 1, and we're going live right now. How's it going, everybody? It is Ryan Rhoades with Reformation Designs, and today you are watching the Creative Revolution Podcast, Season 2, Episode 1, and I'm here with my friend Rodney Vance. Rodney, why don't you say hello?
Hey, how are you? Good to see you, Ryan.
Good to see you too, sir. We've got Mary B., Brent Metcalf, Charles Perallo, Sean Smith have joined in. Hello to all of you. And today we're going to be talking about making your own films and all of the stuff that goes into that, from the writing, the brainstorming, the jockeying with actors and trying to figure out who's going to get paid what, and all the different things that go into making this stuff happen. And Rodney, first and foremost, thank you for coming on. Why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit and tell those who are watching and listening via our podcast a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are at this point.
Okay. I come at storytelling primarily through writing. I worked for a dozen years in Hollywood, making a living as a writer, writing screenplays and writing for television. It wasn't till we went through the writer's strike of 2007, 2008, and a combination of other factors that led me to take a teaching job up in the Napa Valley for 4 years. And then I've continued staying and teaching to this day. It was while I was up there teaching that I was trying to figure out how to fund an underfunded film department, and decided, well, I have a choice. I can either go out and raise money from donors, or we can put our money where our mouth is and actually try to raise money by making a movie. So I produced and directed my first film at that time. I had directed a number of stage plays, but that was the first film. It was a giant screen film called Napa Valley Dreams. And then after moving back to Southern California, I made a second film, a short one, and which I can tell you more about later if you like. And now I'm starting to produce my first feature film. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how I got to where I am. How's that for a quick summary of multiple years?
That's a great summary. And you have, I always think it's exciting whenever I get to talk with people who have Internet Movie Database profiles. And so you do have one. And so if you guys are interested in some of the things that Rodney's done, you can go check that out on imdb.com. So, Rodney, I guess we'll just dive right in here. We're talking about filmmaking, we're talking about all the different things that go into it, and I'm sure that actually, first of all, how long have you been interested in film and filmmaking? Like, what was that initial spark?
I wrote my first very simple play when I was in third grade and had it produced by my classmates. When I was in seventh grade, I had my first story published in a national magazine. I won my first national playwriting competition when I was a junior in high school. So the quick answer to that question is storytelling has always been a passion, and it's just always been finding the channel for the storytelling. It doesn't really matter to me too much whether it's plays or children's books or television or film. As long as there's a story involved, I'm good with it.
Very cool. And so you recommended a book to me a number of months ago that has been very, very instrumental in my own career so far doing media, and it was actually something that led to me deciding to do this podcast in the first place. And it was a book by, I think the guy's name is Christopher Vogler.
Yeah, Christopher Vogler wrote a book called The Writer's Journey.
The Writer's Journey, that was it.
On the hero's journey. A very good book. It puts storytelling structure in the context of the growth journey that we all undertake. And
like in the midst of the creative process, like going from
yeah,
I have an
exactly.
idea to now I have a feature film or a book or whatever.
Yeah, exactly right. And the reason, I mean, there's a reason that stories have a beginning, middle, and end. And they have this hero's journey or writer's journey, however you want to describe it, and that is fundamentally that is how human beings grow and change. We see something as children that we want to learn how to do. We want to learn how to run so we can play tag with older kids. And at first, we can't do it. We try, we don't succeed. We fall down, we fail a lot, and then eventually we figure out how to do it. And that's essentially what a story is. It's a person of some sort, and the person can be a broom with human characteristics. But it's a person of some sort who wants something, struggles to get it, and then either achieves it or doesn't achieve it. And that's the way we humans will grow. Storytelling is a record of human growth.
Right. That's really good. I'm going to write that down. Say that again. Storytelling.
Story- it's not that profound, Ryan. Sorry.
It is
Storytelling is a
profound.
record of human growth. But yeah, that's why things like The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler tap into that primal sense of what storytelling is. And when we understand the storytelling, then everything is possible in terms of what media we use to communicate the story.
Right. So I guess that's a really good segue into the next question that I had was really, what I know you said that it's always kind of been a spark and a passion, but was there any kind of specific event, or did you see a film or something that kind of was that moment where you decided, you know what, I want to go in and I want to do this as part of my career. I want to do this as something that's a hobby, a passion. Was there any kind of initial, open heavens moment or something, or was it kind of just a gradual thing over time for you?
About 2 weeks ago at an art gallery opening, I ran into the person who was very significant in terms of the question that you're asking. Her name was Miss Lucerne French, and she was my sophomore high school English teacher, and I had not seen her since my sophomore year in high school. And honestly, she recognized me before I recognized her, but we reconnected. We had a wonderful conversation. She was very important to me because she took me to my very first play. Since I went to high school in the Inland Empire of Southern California, she took me to the University of Redlands along with other students in the class. It wasn't just me. To see The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams performed by the drama department at the University of Redlands. I had never seen a play before. I didn't know such a thing even existed, honestly. I mean, I knew the plays existed, but
Sure.
not like that, with full costumes and everything else. I was completely agog at what I saw. And I suppose if there was any event that really opened my mind to the possibility of saying, this is something you can actually do, that would probably be the event right there.
So in terms of that, was it something where you were enamored at all of the different moving parts working together to create this one grand narrative? Or, I mean, that those are the things that kind of inspire me about plays and films and whatever. I'm always the type to sit back after most people have left the theater and just watch all of the names of all the different people, and it's like, especially in the visual effects department, because it's something that I've always been into. It's like, oh, here's the visual effects crew, and it's like, 3 miles long of names, and it makes you wonder. It's like, what are those people doing right now, and just all the different moving parts that come together on this one grand story.
Well, my first impression was one of astonishment at how much work had gone into this. They had built this whole set. There were these gauzy curtains sort of blowing from some offstage fan. And everybody in the play had actually memorized all their lines. I thought, wow, that's a lot of work. Then I got caught up in the story itself and was profoundly moved by it. I was raised in a very conservative environment, so we saw very little television as children, and I had not yet been to see a movie in the theater, which wasn't going to happen for another 4 years. So in many ways, this seeing this play was my first experience at seeing anything um, that was live and in front of me, that where people had worked incredibly hard to communicate um, the reality of a story, and I was just simply blown away by the whole thing.
Very cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. You kind of getting into that. It's always fascinating to me when I interview and talk to other creative people who are doing, whether it's music or film or building businesses or whatever it is, that there's always these stories that got them to where they currently are. And
Yeah,
I love kind of extrapolating that, and especially whenever people are feeling stuck in their creative pursuit, I find that kind of going back to those origin stories and asking those deeper questions, like, what was it that really lit me up when I got into this in the first place, is always a really big key to kind of taking things to the next level. So thank you for sharing that.
yeah, I agree with you. I think even when you're telling a story, sometimes to sit down and write out, why is it that I personally want to tell this story, and write that down on a piece of paper, and then put the piece of paper in a drawer somewhere. And when you get really stuck, exactly like you said, going back to these origin stories, just pull that piece of paper out and remind yourself of why you're doing this. And it can often get you unstuck.
There was there was a moment a number of years ago when I had the opportunity to interview someone named Jen Lim. She was one of the former CEOs at Zappos, the
Uh-huh.
multi-billion-dollar shoe company. Um,
Yeah.
and I had come across her stuff on Twitter. She's working with a company now called Delivering Happiness, all about kind of cultivating happiness in the workplace and
Oh, that
those kinds
sounds
of things.
wonderful.
So I had reached out to her on Twitter, just kind of randomly, just saying, hey, I like to interview entrepreneurs and business owners about, how they got where they are and those kinds of things. And I was curious if you'd be interested in doing an interview. And it took like 2 months, but she finally ended up, connecting back with me after a series of back and forth emails with her agent and that kind of thing. And she's like, hey, I'm going to be at the Oakland airport for like an hour layover if you want to, meet me at the airport and interview me there. And so I was like, let's see what happens. So I drove out there. I was living in Silicon Valley at the time. And we ended up connecting and having a really great interview. And one of the things that she said, one of the questions I like to ask people a lot is, if there's one bit of advice that you would give to anyone who's trying to build their own thing, what would that be? And she basically echoed what you just said. She said, in the life of any entrepreneur, there's going to be all these ups and downs, and inevitably there's going to be times when you're like laying on the floor, looking at the ceiling, wondering how you're going to get from point A to point B. And she said the biggest key that she can recommend in those moments is always remember why you got started in the first place, because that acts like you're kind of almost like your guiding star whenever you're
Yeah,
feeling like
exactly.
everything's falling apart. So
Yeah.
it's good advice. And if you're watching and you're feeling stuck, ask yourself, first of all, why is it that you're doing what you're doing? Secondly, are you actually enjoying what you're doing? And thirdly, what are you going to do about it? So something to think about if you're watching
Sometimes I
it.
think I'm interrupting. I'm
No, no,
sorry.
no, I'm done.
Sometimes I think when we get stuck, it's because we have strayed away from the reason why we're doing whatever it is we're doing in the first place. And to just go back and remind ourselves why we're doing this is all it takes to get unstuck. Not always, but often it just sort of says, oh, yeah, that's right. That's what I'm doing this for. And
Right.
everything needs to work again.
Absolutely. And I echo that 1,000 times. And it's funny because for how much I talk about this and how much I write about it and how much content I put out about it, I still deal with it. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
number of things right now in my life personally that I'm looking at that like, where do we want to go next, and all of those different things, and in my own private time, in my own journals and whatever, I'm always still asking those questions. So you're not alone if you're listening and watching. We all deal with it. So, okay, so that probably is a good segue. And actually, if anybody's watching and has any questions for Rodney, feel free to drop them in the comments here. If you're watching live, we will see those and we'll do our best to get to those as soon as we can. So let me write that down here. Okay. And Rodney, if at any point you feel like interrupting me and those kinds of, and just interjecting, feel free to do so.
Sure.
So,
thank you.
So next question that I had written down here for you was, how would you advise someone who believes they have a story to share but isn't sure where to get started?
Well, I think if you have a story that you are very eager to share, first of all, decide what media you want to use to share it in. Is this a book? Is it a children's book? Who's your market? Is this a movie? Is it a television series? What is this? What do you have? What's the best format to tell the story that you want to tell? Once you've decided what format you want to use and who will actually watch or read or listen to your story, then you have to figure out how to get your story in front of those people. And I'm going to kind of stop there for just a moment, because if you go too far down that road as a producer, you'll never create the story. So just go that far and only that far. What is the media that you want to use to tell your story? Who are you telling the story to? And then put all those questions aside and create your story. By create, I mean write. Either write the book, write the script, write whatever it is that you need to do to be able to move forward. Then you can put your producer hat back on once you've told the story as you want to tell it. And that takes a while, because the first time you tell your story, it will inevitably be full of cliches. Cliches simply being, this is the way other people before you have told the story. This is the way you've heard similar kinds of stories told before. And you want to get past that, if at all possible, and get to the core, again, of why you're telling the story in the first place. What is it about you and that is within you that connects to this particular story? And that has to come out in the storytelling. That's where the originality comes from. That's where the real creativity comes from, is from within yourself. So find your take on this particular type of story and tell it your way. Once you are very confident in your story, then you can begin to work on getting that story in front of an audience. If it's a film, then there's a production process that you go through and a sales process. If it's a play, there's still a production and sales process that you go through, but it's very different kinds of steps. Same with a book. And if it's a book for adults, that's one set of steps. If it's a book for children, it's another. And there are pathways that are available to you in each. I would encourage you, if you have a story that you believe in fully and that you believe that you have told in the manner that you want to tell it, that you then figure out how to do it. Figure out what the pathway is for your particular project or your particular story. And if you want, Ryan, we can talk about particular pathways for one media or another and how to do it. But each one, depending on what your pathway is to your audience, each one will have its own unique set of challenges, its own unique set of opportunities, but each one is doable. Each one is doable.
And that's the other thing too, is that each one of those pathways is oftentimes a few web searches away from at least getting that next step, at least figuring out, okay, here's some things that I need to do. And I know I would agree with you in terms of people getting caught up in the detail aspect of things, because whenever we have people that come to us for helping them develop their business or their branding or any of those kinds of things, I run into the same stuff all the time, where it's like they get so caught up in the minutia that they don't actually build the business, or they don't actually move forward. In this case, with developing or writing the story or writing the book or writing the screenplay. And once you've kind of made that decision, I think the biggest struggle that most people have is just getting started and realizing that it's not something that just kind of falls out of the sky. It really is a discipline that you have to establish.
Yeah, there's this fantasy we have as writers that, oh, if I write a really good script or a really good book, then I will sell it to a studio or a publisher and they will take over the marketing and they will do everything from there.
It doesn't work like that?
No, it doesn't work like that. Not unless you're already well established and some studio hires you on to do something, in which case, then yes, it works like that. But it works like that only for a very, very small number of people. As you well know, Ryan, you're being sarcastic with me.
I am being sarcastic. And that's I think that especially since we're, in this episode we are talking about making your own films. I mean, what are some things, kind of along the same lines of this question? What do those steps look like for people who maybe they have a screenplay idea and they've already kind of written it out and at least have something that they can show people? Whenever it comes down to those next steps, what are studio heads or people who can actually help make this stuff happen, what are they looking for?
First of all, let me just mention, in light of the hero's journey book and metaphor that we're kind of have been discussing in this conversation, as you begin this journey, you can always find other people who are taking the same journey that you are. There are groups and communities that you can join of like-minded people, and these people can serve two key roles for you. One is they can provide some expertise along the way, and the other is they can provide friendship and sympathy and joys in your success. And
like
all
the mentor avatar, so to speak.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly right. And it's very useful to recognize that you're part of a community of people and you're not alone in what you're doing. So that's very important. A potential negative that happens sometimes with communities is that they get you so caught up in the minutiae of this or that, because you get into head games and power games where it's all about kind of quietly making the other person behave in the way you want them to. You have to be careful of that. Always keep your own story as your own story, and listen and learn from others, but don't let them determine ultimately your process. That's a very difficult line to walk, but you got to figure it out for yourself. That's just one of those things that you got to do as an artist, is figure out how to choose what works for you and where you need to get the help and learn. Then in terms of next steps, once you have the script in hand, the most useful next step, if you can do it, is to find, if you're moving toward film, you need to find an experienced producer with a distribution deal to partner with you.
So can you explain those terms to someone who has no concept of film? Because I mean, you hear things like producer, director, distribution, and I know what those things mean, at least at some level. You know what those things mean, but if for someone who's brand new to it, how do you differentiate between those roles?
The producer is the person who makes the film. The producer is the one who wins the Best Picture Oscar, because they're the one who actually makes the film. They raise the money, the cash that it takes to make the film. They hire the director, they hire the stars, and whatever else is needed to actually make the film. It's the producer who does that. The distributor is the person who distributes the film to the place where the audience can actually see it. That can be in a theater chain or a group of theater chains. It can be on television, on Netflix, wherever it is that you actually see the film at. It's the distributor that places it there. So what you want, ideally, is to be able to attract to your project a producer who has made enough films that they have a relationship with distributors that you think are appropriate to your story. If you think your story would be best served on Netflix, then you want a producer who's had some experience in working with Netflix to come on as a partner. Now, that said, Producers have plenty of their own projects on their plate already that they're working on and trying to pull together. So why on earth would they get involved in yours? And that's where you get to tell your second story. Your first story is the story that you're telling that you want to connect to an audience. Your second story is the story that you're telling to potential producers, which will persuade them to read your first story and potentially produce it. Why is your first story important? Why is it timely? Why? What market actually exists? Who is the audience for your story right now? Which is going back to the very first questions we talked about before you even write it. Who wants to see it? Because if you're looking to make money with your story, and if you're going to turn it into a film, films, even low-budget films, cost millions of dollars, which is a lot of money. I mean, you can buy a really nice house with that.
Yeah.
So it is a business. You can never forget, especially with filmmaking, that it's not simply an art. It is also a business. It involves a lot of money. And so a producer has to know, how can I make money on this? That's the fundamental question that a producer wants to know from you. How can I make money on this? And your answer to that question is crucial. Your answer to that question is, well, this will appeal to the following market segments, which are this size. And yes, you can research this stuff online as well. Other movies that are like my movie have made this much money and appealing to this many market segments, and so on. So you craft your second story, which is essentially a business plan story. And the business plan includes return on investment. If you are doing a documentary film, then perhaps your return on investment is not primarily monetary. Perhaps your return on investment is, this is an issue about which I believe strongly, and which you also, Mr. Producer, believe strongly, or Mr. Investor or Mrs. Investor.
That's the end of part 1. Tune in next time for part 2 of my interview with Rodney Vance on making your own films.